Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Patch 11.2 is approaching oh so soon, and one of my favorite parts of this update has been the power gains that so many classes are making all across the board. Whether you talk about various talent tree changes, revamps, or even little quality of life adjustments for a number of playstyles, especially to those that maybe found themselves on the outskirts of the meta and they're trying to make them a little bit better so they're playable in the next season. Or the inclusion of tier sets, which this time around they've done something interesting, giving you basically 2 tier sets for the price of one that changes depending on your hero spec, which offers so much more build crafting and customizability for every single class and spec out there heading into this brand new content update. For today's video, I wanted to really highlight one of the classes that got a mixture of both, some talents as well as a new tier set of the class of the Evoker, where they're primarily trying to see if they can reinforce preservation to make it a better pick for many players as a viable healer going forward, but also taking a closer look at the different tier set bonuses that will be arriving for this class as part of 11.2. As always though, if you guys want to see more regular class updates such as these for the patch 11.2 for future classes and future tier sets, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. So when it comes to the class of Evoker, we're actually not getting too many crazy amount of changes. They are primarily focusing on ways to buff up preservation, and there's very slight changes for dev and augmentation, so I'm actually going to combine this together with Evoker changes, but also a tier set video for Evokers as well. So I will have it as part of the playlist that I have for different tier sets for 11.2, just because the actual changes are mostly to try to make preservation more playable, more like handleable by majority of players, just try to give it, I guess, more time in the spotlight. But also the actual tier sets are strong, but also very simple to understand. With Devastation, all they did is buff its damage by 3%, so if they continue to buff its damage and monitor it, we might be seeing a situation very similar to Undermine, where dev has been awesome, but it has like natural base scaling that isn't even like super reliant of the tier sets, even though these tier sets do look really good. But if they tune this thing correctly, it could potentially be going into the next patch in a really cool way. They are technically nerfing the Undermine tier set, but that is not new for Evokers, Devastation in particular. They keep giving them like a really good tier set, and the new one isn't as good, so then the old one has to get nerfed, new one needs to be buffed, so it's just the same old song as before. With Augmentation, they didn't really do too much. They did change up the tooltip of Breath of Eons a little bit, just to make sure it is very clear that it's more of like a buff effect rather than a damaging ability. Besides this, I think augmentation tuning is going to come down towards the tail end of the 11.2 update, unless they're giving him new talents, which doesn't seem to be the case. Because the spec itself partially does damage through its own abilities, but also a portion of its damage comes from buffing up all the allies around you. So once they attune all the other classes, I think they'll end up tuning augmentation afterwards. The majority of the changes that we've seen for Evoker is attempts to try to make preservation as best as of a spec as possible. And while this is my all-time favorite spec to play, generally speaking, it isn't popular, and I'm so sad that preservation isn't popular just because it's so cool. The playstyle itself is really fun, and mobile healer is really awesome, and you have echoes where you can copy effects of abilities, so like you can get double new breath healing over time, or maybe like a double reversion with some of the other bonuses, like when you pop a reversion on an ally and they took a bunch of damage, golden hour proc, so a portion of the damage they take, you just get healed instantly. So if you double up with your echo and you press reversion, you get 2 golden hour procs. So this could be really cool for like setups. And then there's things like Lifebind, where if you put up echoes on everybody and use a Verdant Embrace, you're now bound with all of your allies, so when you heal yourself, a portion of the healing heals everybody you bind yourself with. So you can have a full 20 raid stack, full Lifebind procs and combos, which is so cool. Plus this thing has quite a decent bit of damage to healing conversion too, with Lifegiver's Flame, Lifeforce Mender, so it's really awesome to play this thing in general. It just hasn't really gained popularity that much. It's just unique. It's complicated. It's also very positionally inclined, which makes it a little bit annoying to play too. So if they can fix some of those annoyances, I think it will have a better spec overall. How did they change it so far? They're actually feeling, looks like, confident on preservation, so they're actually nerfing their healing by 4%. Nothing to write home about, definitely does not make them like out of meta. They also did end up changing the way that Dream Breath works. They actually nerfed it by 20% on top of it. I think the Dream Breath combo, as well as the Flame Shaper combo, which uses your Dream Breath to empower it, to like ignite it, I think they're probably a little bit worried about how strong this combo will be overall, especially with some of the different talents that this spec has gotten over the past few weeks. One of them being Unshakable. Your empower spells are 10% more effective, so just a raw buff for your basic empowerment skills, offensive and defensive. While charging and healing empower spell, you cannot be knocked back, which is really cool because now if you're trying to go for a big old heal like Spirit Bloom, you can now just like hold on to it and decline being knocked back. You could also do things like canceling the ability technically. Like empowerment skills can be canceled while you're holding them, so you can technically just keep like baiting it, keep like edging the ability, and then cancel it just while you're holding it. You are immune to knockbacks. There's some really cool synergy that I think potentially could be done on certain fights where knockbacks are a thing. Maybe in some PvP situation you might be able to like bait knockback really quickly while holding a spell. I know you're probably not going to hold it for too long or anything, but it's just an interesting mechanic that they added that just also amplifies empowerment skills. The talent that was in there is actually a talent that gave you 2 reversions, so that's just given for free. Now you'll just basically natively have 2 stacks of reversion, which is overall a gain for evokers who most of them picked that talent anyway, which was bottom here as part of the builds. So now it's like just a buff all across the board. Another thing they changed is your capstone. They actually took a tier set either from Dragonflight or War Within. I don't remember which expansion at this point, but temporal compression increases the damage and healing of your next empower spell by 5% per stack. Temporal compression is this little buff here. Every time you cast a bronze spell, and some of the evoker spells are like Marta's bronze, or things like, for example, like Echo, which kind of has like both, but it's really bronze for the most part. Anytime you cast a bronze spell, you get a buff of temporal compression, which buffs up your next empower spell so you can reach its maximum level in less time. So not only are you allowing a spell to potentially reach its maximum uptime quicker, but also now you're buffing it by up to, 20% more damage or healing. So you can have a really big Spirit Bloom, or you can potentially have a really good Dream Breath as well. So even though the nerf Dream Breath in particular as an ability, you can still technically buff it up with this capstone. And now that they changed this capstone, the ability of Stasis did move a little bit. Stasis is now found over here on the choice node with Temporal Artificer. Stasis is such a good skill, they wanted to make it easier for evokers to pick up without having to commit all the way to the bottom right section of the talent tree, which most evokers felt like you had to. They want to be able to let you go bottom right, middle, or bottom left. So with this, you're able to go down the middle, grab it really quickly, and then focus on other talents as much as you want to. So Stasis is exactly the same. It's a very strong skill, but they're trying to give you like a different effect where Stasis needs to be competitive against an easier to use effect that is just as strong, or at least attempts to be as strong as Stasis, so it's more of a competition. And their answer is Temporal Artificer, which they buffed up. This ability essentially reduces your main major raid or dungeon cooldown from 4 minutes down to 2 minutes. Rewind as itself, as a button, is actually pretty strong, and I tried it in dungeons. It does do a decent bit of healing. It is a fantastic emergency heal button as well, and being able to use it more often in a raid could be strong on its own. I think at the end of the day, it'll come down to how well is reversion working out as a cooldown, and if getting more uses out of it is going to be better, or if just the setup combos you can do with Stasis, which like are numerate, are going to be stronger overall. My money on Stasis, but I'm hoping that at least like Temporal Artificer would be better when it comes to M+ content at the very least, as it does feel pretty easy to play with. Outside of this, they also wanted to make sure that Preservation actually has some sort of an external, mostly just to help tanks get saved. Time Dilation is normally their answer that allows you to basically give a tank stagger of Brewmaster, allow them to take a portion of the damage to the face, and a portion will be taken over 10 seconds, which can be good in some cases. It helps smooth out the damage, but it's not always like a great answer to everything. And they feel like Preservation probably needs some kind of like a damage smoother, so they actually give you 2 new talents to buff it up. Either you can have 2 time dilations, which have a shorter cooldown, so you're able to use them a little bit more aggressively, which can be good in some situations, or you can now have the delayed damage from time dilation be reduced. 15% of it just gets absorbed, so it just gets removed completely. So in a way, you are basically reducing damage taken from time dilation, though it's not like a 50% damage reduction, it's more like an 8%, because it's like you're reducing 50% by 15, so it's half as effective. I guess it's better than nothing. I would have loved to just like have, while time dilation is on an ally, they get to take some damage reduced, and they take 15% less damage. I think that straightforward mechanic would have been much better for time dilation, but either way, that's at least going to make things a bit better. Outside of this, I also wanted to buff up an aspect of Evoker, specifically Emerald Blossoms, which are strong as a healing ability, they just haven't really been that good recently. Emerald Blossoms on its own, technically for preservation, do have some mechanical things like fluttering seedlings from Emerald Blossoms can heal allies, and then you gain 30% chance per seedling to grow into another Emerald Blossom. So as you drop in blossoms, more blossoms are grown and they can proc themselves. As you fire out blossoms, you'll be able to create a sprout on the ground that gathers a portion of your healing and then blooms to divide it amongst your allies. So blossoms can spawn more blooms and it's like a self-contained playstyle that should be strong on its own, especially in raids where everybody's stacked together. It just hasn't really been that good, at least for last bit that I've been playing Evoker. It sometimes wanes and goes. Sometimes it's kind of okay, and other times it's really not that good at all. It's also kind of hard to play at times because it's very resource intensive. You can run out of mana very quickly. But then buffing it by 25% can at least make all those like playstyles that work off of it potentially a little bit better. Maybe we'll see Evokers playing Blossom builds in the future, but unless we see some kind of like a crazy build, I doubt it, which is a little bit sad. They also wanted to make dungeon healing a little bit better. So Temporal Anomaly, it's like an ability that sends out an orb that as it passes through allies, you'll put a shield on them. They want to make sure that shield is now 100% more effective in small party groups. So this healing is reduced beyond 5 targets, but when it comes to a big 5-man dungeon, this does become more effective of a heal, something you want to throw out. It is usually very mana expensive, but in dungeon content, it's one of the easiest ways to apply a bunch of echoes on people. And then from there, you can just apply a bunch of reversions. And those reversions can proc you things like instant cast Living Flames that heal for more. And you can stack up multiple charges. So you could either use it to damage enemies or heal allies. It's like a very good self-contained combo. And they're just making this better in group content, which is perfectly fine. Dream Flight is another ability they're buffing up, which is your capstone ability. It allows you to essentially take up in the air and just rain down, instead of damage, you rain down a bunch of healing mist on allies, doing some immediate healing to allies within the path, but also healing over time or 15 seconds. They did want to make this heal be 150% more effective instead of 100% more effective outside of 5-man content. So they just buffed it up by a bunch to try to make it a little bit better and try to make this whole bottom left section of the talent tree just a little bit stronger, which I think is going to be nice overall for some fights where Dream Flight can be usable. But from there, we can now move on into the tier sets as well as the hero talent adjustments, which I'm kind of going to combine together. Starting with one that a lot of players have played, I think, if you ever picked up Devastation, and that is Scale Commander, which in my opinion got probably the coolest tier set. Scale Commander thematically is all about becoming the commander of Evokers, being able to summon them to bombard enemies from the sky, being able to amplify all of your main abilities like Disintegrate so it hits multiple targets, and they heavily lean to this commander playstyle with their tier set, which is super wacky. While flying and during deep breath, for 10 seconds afterwards, you command a squadron of 2 Drakthir who will attack your targets with Disintegrate Empire. So as you use the ability of deep breath, you'll actually notice 2 evokers join you, and now you have 2 pets that will follow you around and attack your targets. You literally get mirror images as an evoker. They're literally commandos that actually, when you summon them, they'll say like ready for battle with like a voice line, and they will actually attack stuff for you. It is really, really wild, but a lot of these tiers that summons NPCs to follow you. So it really made, as a commander into the Scale Commander in the most literal way possible. With a 4 set, while the squadron is active, your Mass Disintegrate strikes up to 2 additional targets. In addition, your squadron assists you for 5 additional seconds. Unfortunately, I can't lay too many train dummies around these 4 right here, but I can at least show you what that empowerment ability looks like. So to get the Mass Disintegrate, you got to be able to use your empowerment skills. So now you're next to Disintegrates will strike multiple targets. They will bust out the commandos, and when I beam, I can have up to 5 beams if I have enough targets in front of me. And these evokers will basically mimic my abilities. They will primarily disintegrate, but they'll also pyre around, so their damage is kind of going to be a little bit all over the place. It seems like they're focusing on my bombardment targets more than anything. And the damage they do overall is like 20% of your overall damage within dungeons. They're pretty strong on their own. They just passively do stuff, and as long as they don't bug out, which doesn't seem like they have any like anything that causes them to break for some reason, they seem to do okay all on their own, honestly. This tier set is going to be exactly the same for your augmentation spec, which doesn't really change things too much. There is some cooldown reduction with your eruptions as well as some of your upheavals with AUG, but it's not super crazy. Majority of the damage though, of like your personal damage, is going to be those squadron commandos, which is really cool. Now, another playstyle Evoker, which I actually think has gotten a lot more popular as of Season 2, is actually going to be Flame Shaper, which there's a good chance that if you've been playing your Evoker, you probably switched over to Flame Shaper, and while the actual like buffs and talents and passives do sound a little complicated, the actual combos you can pull off with Dev as Flame Shaper is ridiculously simple, and it does a truckload of damage, so there's a good chance that most of you might be familiar with it if you mess with the Devastation. But if you're not familiar, primarily ability of this playstyle is going to revolve around the ability of Engulf, where basically you want to use this ability after you load up the enemy full of dots. Those dots then explode, doing a bunch of damage. The biggest dot you want to really maximize is your Fire Breath as a damage spec, or Dream Breath as a healing spec, because that dot also explodes, doing AoE damage to things around you. So this ends up being a button that's good in single target and AoE. The playstyle also has some damage over time talents and components and light damage over time gameplay, though Evokers don't really play into heavy damage over time or healing over time builds, but the tier set does make the playstyle a little bit more interesting in some ways. The tier set 2 set, Engulf stokes your inner flame, increasing your damage and healing over time by 25% and increasing the chance to gain essence burst by 50% for 12 seconds, stacks up to 2 times. Multiple applications may overlap. Like I said, Devastation isn't really a dot spec, but there are some periodic damage over time components in talents. Maybe those will be significant enough with the tier set to heavily incentivize a dot-based gameplay, or maybe not. Maybe you'll actually just ignore it, play exactly the same as you did, and some of your basic components, like such as your ability of Disintegrate, which technically deals periodic damage, will just be stronger for a short moment, and that'll be enough to make that tier set decent all on its own. But this overall just becomes a buff that allows you to gain more Essence Burst and increase your dot damage. The fourth set allows you, while consuming Essence Burst, to fire a Essence Bomb at the target, which will deal additional arcane damage with a 5 target soft cap. So if, let's say, nothing really changes for the spec of the Evoker and you're basically playing the tier set as you normally would, or at least not really doing anything special with the tier set, but playing the classes you normally would, you're just going to be able to get a bunch of extra procs during those big burst windows, while also having a higher chance to be able to get even more procs to just line up even more damage against the target. And you can see the damage of the actual Essence Bomb. Like, if you can get a bunch of procs regularly, it can actually kind of scale up, especially with the number of targets that it's hitting. For the spec of Preservation, it basically does the same, but instead of empowering your damage over time components, you'll just empower your healing over time components. Technically damage over time as well, so Fire Breath playstyles are going to be just fine, but you are also going to be mostly focusing on the healing time components, with a foresight use an Essence Bomb to heal allies when they're stacked together rather than to damage enemies. Then we also have the Chrono Warden, which has also got a really cool tier set. Chrono Warden has always been a little weird because it has the mechanic of Chrono Flame, which just buffs up your living flame, and then it just has like a load of different buffs all across the board, one of them being Temporal Burst, where every time you press tip the scales, it now no longer just uses an ability to empower your next breath ability or any kind of empowerment skill. It instead is now used as a buff, which grants you a bunch of haste, movement speed, cooldown recovery for 30 seconds. Though this buff does wane over time. It starts out very strong and then slowly loses some momentum as it gets towards the tail end. So their tier set is going to play around that big burst window further. With the 2 set reading, tip the scales cooldown is reduced to 60 seconds, so you could use it every minute. That's huge, so basically every minute you have a burst window. Also, Temporal Burst, the burst window, now causes Chrono Flames to strike 2 additional targets and repeat 15% additional damage or healing up to a maximum cap. And the actual animation is kind of cool. So as a healing evoker, you'll basically be able to get 3 Chrono Flames for the price of 1. Now, normally spamming Flame at an ally is not really mana efficient. It doesn't do enough healing and burns way too much mana way too quickly. But now you can basically tip the scales and do damage to an enemy, and a Flame will heal an ally if one is present and one is in need. So you basically just get additional healing while also focusing on damage. These flames could also be further empowered with things like Life Spark, so you can give even bigger burst healing that cleaves multiple allies or hits multiple enemies for damage, and it also procs you a bunch of Essence Burst too, so it's going to give you a lot more resources. As augmentation, you get a talent called Pupil of Alexstrasza, which normally allows Living Flame to cleave a secondary target. As a Chrono Warden, it basically can stack together, so you have 4 projectiles instead of just 2 that you normally would when Tip the Scales is used for a burst window. So for them, technically, it can give them just a lot more of this raw personal damage that cleaves multiple targets. Definitely a lot of resources on top of it, but it is quite a decent bit of overall damage just with the Living Flame spam overall when it comes to AoE content. But the thing though about augmentation is I actually looked at their talents, and outside of like a couple of novel Evoker class talents, there isn't too many talents where augmentation can take advantage and like buff up Living Flame in a crazy way like you can with Devastation. So I was hoping there would be some cool synergy, but that's kind of like the synergy of being able to cleave multiple targets ends there. There's not really anything that you could really build off of it. You'll just get a little bit more raw damage out of Living Flames, and that's essentially about it. It just, the buck stops there, which is what I meant by a lot of these tier sets are actually very straightforward. Like for the augmentation in particular, it's not like that there's like some obvious synergy. It's more like there's just no real huge synergy for them to take advantage of or anything. So it's a little unfortunate, to be honest. However, maybe that was the intention behind the Evoker tier sets. A lot of them feel like very straightforward. You could argue the Flame Shaper maybe has some talent capability and like very niche playstyles, but also it might need to be ignored in the future. The buff itself is significant enough, and if you just pick up a couple of talents to buff up like healing over time, damage over time components, you may not even heavily invest into it and just get raw additional damage or healing without changing a thing. But if I had to take a guess, I'm thinking they probably kept the actual tier sets for Evokers very straightforward, while also keeping them kind of like flavorful, mostly just to not overcomplicate the class. And I think Evoker is one of the more complex classes in the game. Not super complicated, but like between Devastation, Augmentation, Preservation, the whole movement while casting and the limited range of your abilities and positional requirements for things. I mean, all of that by itself could also be as is fairly daunting for a lot of players anyway, so giving them like a more streamlined tier set in my head makes a little bit of sense, to be honest. But with that being said, as always, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching and hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciate it. Also join our Discord community, especially if you just want to keep up with any major class changes for the patch 11.2, as the community usually dives into those topics fairly regularly as soon as we get something new in the PTR. Also, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.